Welcome, everyone. My name's Erin. I'm the school programs coordinator here at the Mark Twain House and Museum. I'll let us sort of fill in. If you want to share where you're joining us from, we'd love to know. I feel like we should have some music to play while everyone enters. Just so you know, if you'd like a live transcript of tonight's conversation, you can just hit enable transcript, a little CC button at the bottom, and you'll be able to see that throughout the conversation tonight. So a bit of change of plans. In some ways, this event has had a rough road. Number one, some of you may have noticed that our website has been less than functional today. It's been a joyride. So we apologize for that. We have found a way for you to buy the book tonight, so no worries. You'll be able to do that. But also, you will have noticed that the original host for this had been replaced by Susan Campbell, who was supposed to be our moderator for this evening. Susan, at the last minute, was unable to join us. So tonight, Lauren will be talking with me and with Mallory Howard, our assistant curator, for what we hope will be a good and lively conversation. So we have some Connecticut folks, some West Coast folks. I'm interested to see if we have some international viewers tonight, who always provide some great perspective. All right, so as people filter in, I will get us started with just some of our housekeeping. As I said, my name's Erin Bartram. I'm the school programs coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum. And I'm really, really happy to have you join us here tonight. And just to clarify, because we had a little confusion today, we're the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, which is where Twain lived for about 2 decades as an adult. Tonight, we're welcoming Lauren Rankin for a discussion of her new book, Bodies on the Line, at the Front Lines of the Fight to Protect Abortion in America. I'll introduce her a little more formally in a moment, but first I want to thank our sponsors for the event. The Mark Twain House and Museum's virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring Frank Lord, a beloved trustee of the museum who passed away a few years ago. We're happy to honor his memory with these programs, which we know he would have loved so much. We're also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and CT Public WNPR for supporting tonight's program and all our other virtual programs. One of the benefits, obviously, of this being a virtual program is that you as the audience can have your own conversation in the chat alongside our discussion tonight, and we encourage you to do so. We'll also be posting links to purchase copies of Bodies on the Line from the Mark Twain store. Getting a signed copy through us not only gets you a wonderful book to read, but it also benefits the museum and all of the work that we do here. So what I'm going to share with you in the chat now are 2 different links to buy the book. You will note they are priced differently and they do different things. So the first one is if you don't live near Hartford and you need the book shipped to you, you will note that the link for this says the shipped version. It includes tax and flat rate shipping. The second one that I'll share with you is if you can come by and pick it up in the museum store. And obviously it just includes the tax. So we'll make sure to share those again throughout the evening. This is our little workaround. We just wanted to make sure as we kind of untangle what happened with our website, we wanted to make sure that your purchase experience was safe. So we decided to do it directly through the same system where you got your tickets for tonight. All right. Remember that we'll have a real Q&A for you guys at the end of the evening tonight. So as you go, please put your questions in using the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, but one of the dangers of dropping your question in the chat is those things go by very quickly. And I may miss your question and not be able to write it down. So if you put it in the Q&A, I'll make sure that I see it at the end. And now I will introduce our guest for the evening. Lauren Rankin is a writer, speaker, and activist. She has written for the Washington Post, New York Magazine, Fast Company, Teen Vogue, NBC News, Slate, Time, and many more. She's appeared on MSNBC, SiriusXM, BBC, CTV News, Times Radio, BuzzFeed News, and more, and has been the keynote speaker at places like Rutgers and Cornell. She served as a volunteer clinic escort at a New Jersey abortion clinic from 2014 through 2020, and is a board member of A is For, a reproductive rights advocacy organization. I'm going to welcome Lauren and Mallory up. Please don't forget there will be a Q&A at the end. So drop your questions in the Q&A as we go. So I will add both of you in to the spotlight. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here.
Thank you for doing this with us tonight. I'm very excited to talk with you. And so just to start off, can you give us a summary of what your book is about?
Absolutely. So Bodies on the Line at the front lines of the fight to protect abortion in America is really my, yes, show that copy. It's really my labor of love to the movement that I think changed my life, which is clinic escorting. So not a lot of people know what clinic escorts are, but I kind of trace the history and evolution of this movement in this book of everyday people who volunteered and still do to walk patients past protesters at abortion clinics. They've been there through blockades, assassinations, bombs, and now bans, and the end of Roe versus Wade, and they're still showing up. So it's really a testament to what everyday people can do and the power that we have to find a way to support those in need. And I certainly didn't anticipate the timing, but it feels more prescient than ever.
And you mentioned you yourself was a clinic escort. What was your motivation for doing that?
I was a clinic escort from 2014 to 2020 in northern New Jersey when I lived in New Jersey and then in Brooklyn. And someone reached out to me and said, I was in graduate school at the time, and I was obviously very supportive of abortion rights, and I had written about it, but I'd never really done anything quite like this. And someone reached out to me and said, hey, this clinic in Englewood, New Jersey is just inundated with people screaming and creating a real scene and making it really difficult for patients. They're starting a clinic escort program. Would you want to come? And I was like, yeah, sure. How hard can it be? Like, yeah, it's New Jersey. I'm sure it's fine. And I had absolutely no idea what I was in for. Not just in terms of the virulence and aggression from the protesters, but this sort of intensity of the human interaction that you experience when you're walking someone in that kind of moment past someone screaming the most heinous, vile things at you. It's just, it really reshaped how I thought about abortion as not really so much of as a political fight, but a matter of human dignity.
Wow. That's incredible. So during this research, you include a lot of really interesting, fascinating, heart-wrenching at times stories in your book. Did anything surprise you while you were doing this research and maybe talking to people or just looking in the history? Did anything sort of pop out to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I was kind of shocked at how ubiquitous this was, and this is, these protests at clinics everywhere. I mean, it happens everywhere in the United States, every state. Connecticut, it's happening now. There are Connecticut clinic escorts I profile in this book. The most hostile states to abortion and the most supportive states to abortion. And really the federal government has failed to do anything to solve this crisis for as long as it's been going on. I think the one fact that surprised me most, I didn't actually end up putting this in the book because it just felt a little bizarre, but there was a man who I do mention at the beginning of the book. His name is Robert Schenck, and he is sort of still an evangelical pastor, but a reformed one, and realized how messed up some of the protests he engaged in at the time were. He was arrested several times for carrying around a fetal remains in a jar, including one time he found Bill Clinton, who was in 1992 when he was running for president at like a park, and like tried to put it in his face and was arrested for that. And I'm like, this dude's just walking around with fetal remains in a jar. I mean, where do you get that? You know, like the level, and he's since really talked about the level of dehumanization that was necessary to do something like that. You know, it's just, and it's still happening today. I mean, there was this woman, Lauren Handy, who was recently arrested. They found 5 fetuses in her house, and she claimed there were more than 100 that they basically stole from a clinic. I mean, that's like that level of detachment from humanity, I think really kind of stunned me in terms of how common it is and far-reaching.
I wonder if I can ask you to fill some folks in if they're not quite sure. You sort of talked about the role of the federal government, and we're talking about protests and harassment that happen outside of clinics. And we've had conversations about who should have to have protests outside of where they live and work. I wonder if you could explain a bit why these are such sites of protest and the ways in which protesters have been protected at these sites.
Absolutely. So when Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, it was it was a seismic ruling. Even those who were pushing for a repeal of abortion restrictions and abortion bans didn't really see something that wide-reaching coming that quickly. And it transformed everything. Obviously, suddenly abortion was legal everywhere. And the burgeoning opposition to abortion, which it's important to note, was not based in the evangelical church at that time. The evangelical church didn't care about abortion. They didn't take a position on it. They thought it was an issue for Catholics. But the way that the movement got moving, and not as a political force, but in terms of fighting against this legalization, was in showing up to clinics. They couldn't actually do anything to change the law. They could play the long game, which ultimately they did, and they won that. But in the short term, their goal was, okay, so if I can't actually ban abortion or overturn Roe versus Wade, then I can make it as difficult as possible for somebody to get in a clinic. And that escalated very quickly. So Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973. By, a decade after it had been decided, protesters were descending en masse. Joseph Scheidler, a man out of Chicago who founded the Pro-Life Action League, was carrying a bullhorn and screaming at people, riling all of these folks up outside of clinics, making it so that you literally couldn't get into the clinic. And really, community volunteers were like, this is not okay with me. I need to find a way to do something. The federal government really did nothing. In 1983, the president was Ronald Reagan. He truly could not have cared less about violence at abortion clinics. It wasn't until 1994. So the first abortion provider in American history, Dr. David Gunn, was murdered in 1993. And that was really sort of the turning point. Clinton was in the White House, and they were literally shooting people after years of massive blockades. And when I say blockade, I don't just mean like a couple of people up there being like, "Yo, murder your baby." I'm talking thousands of people chaining themselves to the clinic doors, parking vehicles filled with cement blocks in front of a clinic, literally laying down in front of cars, just mass pandemonium at clinics across the country. And it wasn't until Dr. Gunn was murdered that Congress finally did something, and they passed the Federal Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which we call the FACE Act, in 1994. It makes it a felony to block access or intimidate someone out of accessing a reproductive health clinic. And blockades largely stopped, but now that protesting became so much more quotidian after that. You might not have thousands of people trying to block access to a clinic, but you have dozens of people there every week who know you, who know the clinic, who know the patients, and they know how to get under your skin and skirt around the law, but to make it as emotionally traumatic as it can be to get in the door. And the government still hasn't done anything. 2014, the Supreme Court allowed the overturning of Massachusetts 35-foot buffer zone at abortion clinics, all while now they're asking for reinforcements outside of justices' homes, and there's a buffer zone outside of the Supreme Court. So justice for me, but not for thee, I guess, is the way it goes with that.
So kind of continuing along that line, you mentioned people trying to get under their skin. What are some of the tactics you saw them use, either in your own experience as an escort or that stories that you've heard? What are some of the things that they do to try to intimidate these people?
So there are so many different groups that have different ways of going about this that it makes it even more chaotic and nightmarish. At the clinic where I volunteered, we had 3 groups of protesters largely. One was a group of Korean Catholics who just stood across the street and held a little picture of Jesus and never really said anything to anybody, and they didn't really bother anyone. So we were pretty much fine with them being there. I believe in your right to peacefully express your opinion. And they never disrupted the clinic in any way. But then there was a second group, and this is very common at clinics across the country, what we call crisis pregnancy centers. So if you're driving down a highway and you see a billboard that says pregnant, scared, call blah, blah, blah. Don't call that number. That is not a clinic. They will not help you. It is a crisis pregnancy center. So those are fake clinics that outnumber abortion clinics, I think 10 to 1 in this country. They're run by, often funded by the Catholic Church. And their sole goal is to talk you out of having an abortion. They lie to you about abortion. They'll lie to you about how far along you are in a pregnancy. So there was a CPC directly across the street from my clinic, which is very common. They tend to put themselves as close to a clinic as possible. And then they send the people who work there out in front of the clinic to kind of either lead you to, oh, you're looking for, oh, are you pregnant? Are you here for? Come across the street. So, which is part of what clinic escorts are there to do, which is say, no, you have an appointment at the clinic. This is the clinic. That is not a clinic. But they also will follow people for blocks and saying things that sound like they aren't so hostile, like, you're so beautiful, your baby will be so beautiful. You don't want to murder your baby's going to be a beautiful reflection of God. Things that don't sound that horrific when you think about it. But if you actually put yourself in the shoes of someone walking in to get an abortion and you don't know why they're there, can be really creepy and traumatizing. Then the third group we had was the worst, which was a group of all male evangelical street preachers who would bring bullhorns and yell just horrific things. You'll still be the mother, just the mother of a dead baby. They would plant themselves right in front of the door. And my clinic at different points had a buffer zone in effect, and then it didn't. And they would get as close as they could to you. When the buffer zone wasn't in effect, they would stand right next to the door and would scream into the door. You're a murderer, you're gonna die in there. These are butchers, horrible things. And would get physically aggressive with us as clinic escorts too. I was shoved, I was smacked in the face. I'm 5 feet tall. I'm a little one, and I got jostled around quite a bit. We're not supposed to engage with them. And they know that. So they really try to sort of egg you on, and they really want to egg on a patient, especially if a patient comes with a male companion. They really want to get under that companion's skin so that the companion will attack them, and then they can cry victim. But really it's just about being as cruel as humanly possible. And there are no limits to what they will say. That is pretty much common at every clinic. Some clinics deal with, much more overtly violent people. There are domestic terrorists that show up at clinics. One showed up at mine once, but that was rare. And you just have no idea what these people are capable of, because clinics are being bombed and set ablaze right now. And you never know if that's going to happen to your clinic. So it creates just a sense of unease, in addition to having to mitigate the emotional trauma that the people you're walking with are experiencing in real time.
Yeah, we were talking before that all three of us are in a fairly similar age bracket. And I think much of our life has seen, you know, George Tiller and Eric Rudolph and all this kind of stuff has been that kind of violence has kind of always been there. It's notable that it doesn't ever get strung together often in the media as terrorism, but it is kind of notable that it's there. I wondered, you mentioned in the book, and I feel like this is a larger conversation, that our discomfort with or aversion to talking about abortion makes us miss things. And I wonder if you can expand a little more on that.
Yeah, I don't really use the phrase pro-choice or a woman's right to choose. I don't use that phrase for a lot of reasons, which we can get into, but I say the word abortion. We're talking about abortion. That is a thing that 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant in this country have. It is extremely common. It has existed in the United States since the very beginning of this country. People have been having abortions since the beginning of time. So often what we do, even those, sometimes in the Democratic Party in particular, who are trying to defend this thing, end up skirting around it by saying, well, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. No, I am pro-abortion if you need and want an abortion. I'm pro whatever you need to do. And by refusing to actually use that word and to talk about the thing that we are actually focusing on, we end up sort of creating even more stigma around it, so that we'd actually miss the nuances of people's lives. People have abortions for so many reasons. And I was also mentioning to you before, there's an article out today at the New York Times, that an op-ed piece where this anti-choice person basically says, well, I had an ectopic pregnancy terminated, but that's not an abortion. Yes, it is. That's the technical name for it. And that's okay. You don't have to call it that, but we have to talk about the thing we're talking about, because otherwise, why would anyone else want to defend it? If I'm saying I believe that A is the greatest letter in the alphabet, but I'm not willing to say what that letter is, I'm like, well, I don't care as much for B or C. Also, like, Q is not so great. Talk about the thing that you claim you are defending, because otherwise no one else is going to want to step up to support it too. And abortion is normal and common and frequent and necessary. And the longer that we continue to dance around it with euphemisms, and the more that it's reduced in the media to just a political fight between Republicans and Democrats, rather than the nuances of people's lives, we miss the entire point of abortion, which is so that people can live the lives they want to live. And that's really uncontroversial. Well, except to fascists, they don't love that, but most reasonable people don't feel that way. I really believe that. I really do. And the more we talk about it in the terms that actually fit the human experience, I think there's real power for change in that.
And now, you talked about some of the things that the anti-abortion protesters do outside clinics. How do the escorts prepare to handle those types of things? Is there a certain amount of training that goes into it? And then obviously we talked about the emotional trauma. I'm sure that takes a toll on these escorts as well. So some of them doing this day in and day out. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
For sure. Training is essential when it comes to clinic escorting. I went through training, and every clinic escort at an actual clinic escort program does. Most of these trainings are pretty similar in terms of how they're structured. There is no overarching clinic escort organization. It's much more grassroots and collective than that. But nearly every clinic escorting program in the country has a non-engagement clause. You are not supposed to engage with the protesters in any way. You're not supposed to talk back. You're not supposed to like physically engage with them. You are there to serve the patient. And that does help in terms of narrowing your focus. It's almost like putting blinders on of like, if you're grocery shopping and there's a 2-year-old having a complete meltdown over there and you're like, I have 3 minutes to get in and get out with the oatmeal that I need right now. Put the blinder on, ignore, like you can't hear, that's what it is. It's like a temper tantrum from adult men. And so it's really about focusing on the patient and what they need. You learn a lot in training, but you really learn the most like being out there because you're not prepared for how it just physically feels. And you learn, I learned quickly how to approach people. So I'm wearing a vest that says Clinic Escort Volunteer. The patients are told that we are out there and we will come and help them, but they're getting out of their car and someone's screaming at you, you're a murderous whore, you're gonna die. They're not really focused on reading your vest. So you have to be very clear with them. I'm with the clinic. I'm here to walk you past these people. If you don't want me to, that's totally fine. I support you. Making very clear who you are and what you're doing. And most of them do want the support, but we're not really supposed to touch them either unless they ask for it. It's, you know, using your arms to create like this bubble around you. And it's just like, I can viscerally remember just like whispering, like, focus on my voice. Do not listen to anything else. Just listen to my voice. The door is right there. The door is right there. I mean, sometimes gibberish came out of my mouth. Like if the protesters were screaming so loud, I literally sometimes just went la, 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 just to drown it out. And you kind of get a sense of what some patients need. Some want you to joke with them. Some don't want to talk at all. And that is really hard to train. You just kind of have to sense it over time. I forgot the second question you asked, Mallory, already. I forgot the follow-up.
I even forgot the follow-up because I was so focused on your answer.
Well, but what I think is really important to, the emotional toll, that's what you asked. Yes. So I opened the book with probably one of the worst days I ever had at the clinic. I still think about this person. She was a young girl. I didn't know that until I got her inside, but they had completely blockaded the car. There were like dozens of protesters. They had signs blocking her from even getting out of the cab. And it was just complete pandemonium. And once I did manage to get her inside, I had to call security. Security had to come, had to intervene. It became a whole thing. We had to call the police. But we managed to get her in the clinic, and I looked at her and she was just like probably about 13, 14. And she was just sobbing, terrified, absolutely terrified. And I just held her for like 10 minutes. And I went home that day. I think I slept for like 4 hours. I took like a 4-hour nap. And I just felt completely drained because it's not just being there in that moment for that person, that's a lot of an emotional labor to do. But then I had to go back out there and pretend like nothing had happened. I had to go back out there for another 2 hours, I think I had left in the shift, and just pretend with all of these screaming jerks that did not happen and that everything was fine and I was fine. And I wasn't fine. I was absolutely pissed. I was furious and heartbroken and outraged, and I couldn't show any of that because that's all they really want. They just want to get under your skin. And, you know, some clinic escorts I've talked to for this book, some have been doing this for 30 plus years. I think there's just something in your bones where you're like, I'm defiant as hell and I'm just not going to stop doing this. You know, some have taken extended breaks. I haven't done it since I moved from Brooklyn to Colorado, where I currently live, at the very end of 2019. But it's really just one of those things that sits in your body, and you have to find ways to cope with it. A lot of, once my team got big enough that I didn't have to be there every week, I wasn't. I took time away because you have to care for yourself. Otherwise, like, you can't pour from an empty vessel, which just makes me I'm in so much more admiration of the people who do this, that I talk to, because that was one day for me. That day is pretty common for a lot of people, especially in really hostile states or at clinics that have it really, really bad. And, they need and prioritize caring for themselves. It's really important.
So another thing that I wanted to ask you about that I really enjoyed reading about this in your book was the network that was formed across the country, where people were helping others start their own escort group and giving each other tips, showing up when there was going to be a giant protest that they knew was coming, and sort of becoming reinforcements and giving advice. Can you talk a little bit about that network of support of these different groups across the country?
It's such a beautiful thing. I think maybe that's what surprised me and like heartened me the most about this book, well before the internet. So I talk about in the book the amazing story in 1992 of Buffalo, New York. Operation Rescue, which still exists in a different format, but Operation Rescue was the anti-abortion protest juggernaut that was blockading clinics across the country and wreaking havoc, and no one could figure out how to mitigate what they were doing. They had been very successful in what they called the Summer of Mercy in 1991, where they shut down all of the abortion clinics in Wichita, Kansas. And they announced, we're coming to Buffalo next in the spring of 1992. And Buffalo was just like, hell no, you're not. It's unbelievable what like random citizens did. They plugged in, they got phone trees, they contacted all of these other organizations. So ACT UP was there, Pro-Choice Network, National Organization for Women, all of these small radical collectives in the New York area. And then it just went national. So once NOW got involved, and they had media dedicated with this group called Buffalo United for Choice, thousands of people from across the country, in California, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Chicago, all went to Buffalo and worked with the groups there. There were trainers from the Washington Area Clinic Defense Task Force, WACDF, who came in to help train people in clinic defense. And they kept those clinics open the whole entire week that Operation Rescue was there. That sort of network of connecting with other folks has always been at the heart of clinic escorting, because it's just a grassroots volunteer activity. And so many of clinic escorts now are plugged into things like abortion funds and practical support organizations that are kind of bridging the gap between what used to be national legality and the lack of access that exists for so many people. Now it's so much easier because we have the internet. But like in 1992, these folks like weren't dialing up on AOL, like this required insane amount of long distance phone calls and knowing who to ask, who knows this person, who knows this person, who knows this person. Now, there are really connected, beautiful clinic escort online groups that are very private, and everyone's able to sort of share in real time. This happened today. This person was at my clinic today. I had this terrorist out here. Watch out, I think he's coming to XYZ next. So we're able to sort of communicate in real time in a way that was really difficult to do then. And we show up for each other. Clinic escorts continue to show up for folks. The clinic in Mississippi, Jackson Women's Health Organization, that was at the center of Dobbs, the case that overturned Roe, that clinic's about to close. But they've been dealing with really intense protests, and a bunch of clinic escorts and defenders from across the country went down there to help them. it's really a testament to like how much people are able to do when they know the right question to ask and they know who to ask. And I think we need that spirit now more than we ever have.
Well, sort of on a related note, you know, this, Mallory and I are here in Connecticut. This is where the museum is, with the leaked Roe draft in May. Was it May that happened? April?
May 3rd, I think, yeah.
You know, Connecticut was really one of the first states to sort of try to codify into law some kind of protections against kind of Texas style laws about that seem to violate the Interstate Commerce Clause about
Yes.
About, you know, leaving the state to do something that's not legal in your state, which I just sort of think about the amount of, you know, getting a tattoo wasn't legal in Massachusetts until the early 2000s. You know, a whole lot of people in Massachusetts go to New Hampshire to avoid paying tax on things. But one thing that all of a sudden has kind of become really clear to a lot of people is that they had not really thought about their state's abortion laws. That for me as a historian, hearing people say, oh, we're going back to this time. No, if we went back to that time, abortion would be legal. That many of the laws in states now are much stricter
Yes.
than anything in colonial and 18th and 19th century America. But that for a state like Connecticut, where this is codified into law, how do you think states like that, people in states like that have been reacting? And what has that sort of comparably accessible abortion caused people to miss living in those states?
Number one, if you live in one of those states, please do not make a joke about or say, well, you should just move, or what did you expect? The idea that like a low-income Black woman in Mississippi deserves this because her state is gerrymandered and, you know, has been run by white supremacists since the very beginning is absurd. It's not helpful. I think there, you know, it's not just the fault of people in blue states, but Roe for so long was sort of just the sticker we smacked on this issue. And we're like, well, we got that. Okay, that's good. Without realizing that Roe's promise has been elusive to so many people, not just in hostile states, but in states like Connecticut, states like New York. There are reasons that abortion funds, which are grassroots organizations to pay for abortion for people who can't afford it, had to pop up. So many states that are supportive of abortion rights have things like parental consent laws that require, I think 37 states total have parental consent laws, which means, and that's way more than states that have currently banned abortion. Connecticut is one of them, which requires a minor to get consent from a parent in order to have an abortion. Don't worry, kids, you don't need consent from a parent to have a kid. It's just, I mean, it's just absurd. And if you don't feel comfortable going to your parents, then states have a process called judicial bypass, where you get to go before a judge and ask the judge permission to have an abortion. Those laws are unconscionable on its face. Now they are absolutely dangerous to pregnant minors. So if someone's coming from, I don't know, Texas to Colorado, my state, which thankfully does not actually have a parental consent law, but if it did, they would not have to get consent from their parent back in Texas, which A, maybe they don't even want to do that. B, maybe their parent is someone hostile to this choice, or C, could open them up to possible criminalization back in their home state, as some of these states are rushing to pass seemingly unenforceable and bananas legislation to criminalize leaving the state for an abortion or helping someone leave the state. So parental consent laws in every single pro-choice state need to go now. If you want to know if your state has one, you can go to guttmacher.org, and they have state-by-state rundowns for the laws in your state. And they can tell you if you have a parental consent law. If you do, contact your legislator. And it doesn't have to be at the federal level. The power right now can also come from the state and the local level. There's something else that, you know, I think folks have ignored for a long time, which is even while Roe has been the law of the land, bodily autonomy has not really existed in the same way that we like to think it does for Black women, for brown women, for disabled women, incarcerated women, trans women. Black and brown women have been forcibly sterilized against their will up until probably yesterday. As we recently heard in 2020 about the ICE facilities that sterilized women in custody. So this idea that like, that happens in states like Connecticut, that has happened in states like Connecticut, that's happened in pro-choice states. All of these things, this fabric ties together. I'm pretty sure Medicaid doesn't cover abortion in Connecticut, but it doesn't in the vast majority of states. So if you're a low income person and you're on Medicaid in your state and you get pregnant and need an abortion, you're gonna have to pay for that out of pocket. That's why abortion funds exist. That should be a non-starter. Medicaid should pay for abortion. Every insurance company should pay for abortion because it's healthcare that many people need and rely on. So there are a lot of things that you can do in your blue pro-choice state to ensure that you're protecting this right for other folks. But thinking Roe versus Wade is gone now, it's over, is exactly the wrong thing to do. Roe versus Wade is gone, yes, and that's a national tragedy. It becomes even more important that people in states that are supportive do the work to find the activists, find clinic escorts, reach out to an abortion fund and ask them what you can do. Instead of just saying like, I'll give my house, I'll let people stay in my house, I'll put it on the internet. That's not actually helpful. There's so much that you can do. Like the people I write about in this book show that there is so much you can do. If they can get 10,000 people to Buffalo in the days before the internet, you can donate to an abortion fund, I promise.
And bringing up the abortion fund, Connecticut hadn't had one until recently. And I think Connecticut is in kind of an interesting spot. We were talking before we started about the number of ways Connecticut kind of appears in the history of abortion and contraception. I mean, just the amount that Connecticut is all over the place because of Griswold v. Connecticut. At the moment, Connecticut being the first state to apply a criminal penalty to abortion in 1821, it was functionally the same criminalization that we have now, sort of past the same point. So many of our viewers are from Connecticut, there's a fascinating kind of history here to plumb. I wondered if I could ask, and a reminder, not only to put questions in the Q&A, but I think many people in the past month or so have realized they actually don't know very much about a lot of things. Feel free to, there are no dumb questions. Ask kind of whatever you want. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, you've sort of referred to it, but can you talk about some of the sources you drew on to write this? I think people may be surprised at just how much archival material there actually already is on this history, but I wondered what you drew on.
I need to go to the acknowledgements for that. So this started, I will start with this. This book started as like a pipe dream of mine in 2018, 2019. And I knew a bunch of clinic escorts. So I just reached out to them and asked to talk with them about their experiences. I didn't know what this thing would become. And it's actually how I met my fiance. I interviewed him for this book, and he's the reason I moved from Brooklyn to Colorado. He was a clinic escort for several years. But once I actually figured out what the book was going to be, it was kind of amazing to me how many random people have just like boxes in their garage of stuff. And once I was able to find them, that was pretty unbelievable. It was like a treasure trove. This woman, Ann Horn, who lives in Fort Wayne, just had boxes of like newspaper clippings and all of this related to her time being a clinic escort. But there's actually quite a lot of this archival work that's featured in actual archives you can go to. So from those, the big ones for me were the Adeline Levine Archive at the University of Buffalo. the National Organization for Women Archives, the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America
Yeah, the Schlesinger.
at Harvard Radcliffe
Such a great
Institute,
archive.
Women's Action Coalition Archives at the New York Public Library. And then so many of the organizations that I profiled have their own archives. The National Organization for Women, I mentioned, National Abortion Federation, the Washington Area Clinic Defense Task Force has their own archives. So it was basically like, when I started writing this book in earnest in April of 2020, right when the whole world had shut down. And so it was just like, all I did all day was just like basically scramble, like dig this person out. What do you have? Dig this person out. What do you have? And there's so much amazing material, photos, videos from that time that I obviously couldn't put in the book. I could have put photos, I guess, but people have a lot. They just don't know that it's history because they were told that it wasn't really that important, or no one really paid much attention to it. And you might have like a piece of history in your own house related to something that you don't even know. So it's not history until somebody says, I'm going to write the history of this, and then it's history. Yeah, the archival work was truly bananas for this book. Thank God the New York Times and the Washington Post have digitized their entire publications going back to the 70s. That was extremely helpful. Thank you. Johanna Schoen, who wrote Abortion After Roe, basically every citation she had, I dug through. It was like a nerd scavenger hunt on steroids. It was amazing. And I loved it. But really, like, the biggest source for this book was the people themselves, who told me things that I could never have known. And they didn't even know were stories until they just started talking. I would say at least 70% of the people I interviewed for this book were like, I don't really think I have anything to tell you. I don't really know if I have anything interesting to say. And just asking them to just talk. All of this stuff kind of jumbles out, but they just didn't know that it was anything. It's really quite amazing.
Well, we are at the point where I'm happy to take questions from the audience. I'm going to drop into the chat for those of you who may be interested in dipping into some of this history. Nursing Clio, which is a long-standing magazine on the history of women and reproductive issues, has put together kind of an intro syllabus on some of these. Many of them are well accessible. Magazine articles, newspaper articles, books, and things like that. So I'll drop that in the chat just in case anyone is interested.
I also know, like, with abortion, I want to just reiterate what you said. Like, there's so much that people don't know, and then they feel dumb for not knowing it. But it actually isn't really your fault that you don't know a lot of this. The reason you don't know a lot of this is because nobody talks about this stuff. I think I tweeted the other day how disorienting it is for me to see articles coming out at big time mainstream publications that I pitched 3 years ago, that they're like, that's not really a story. You know, now it's a story, but it's not your fault that you don't know, because the reality of these things aren't really talked about in the media in a meaningful way. So don't be afraid to ask your question. I promise I won't put a dunce cap on you. I'm happy to answer anything.
Yeah, and I think in the past few weeks, we've noticed, as someone whose training is in as a historian of women and gender, that's a field that hasn't been hired in very much, and that many of the historians who do this work have been kind of left out in the cold, and now all of a sudden everyone wants their research. Someone asked in the Q&A the website to check all the different laws. It's the Guttmacher website. Yes. I put it in the chat. It's a little ways up. Barbara asks, for those of us just coming into our voices, where is the best place to start? Because right now I'm just angry, and that's not useful or healthy. Where do I begin?
First of all, Barbara, I want to affirm your anger. It actually is healthy and it is useful. If you're not angry right now, I don't know when you're angry. Like, this is an appropriate occasion to be angry. So I want to affirm that for you. I sound like my therapist, but I do. Anger can be extremely helpful in terms of a collective movement. It's when we just let that anger fester and inside ourselves and we don't actually put it into action that it can become really toxic. So anger is good. Taking action from that anger is even better. So the first thing you're doing is like saying I'm angry, which is step one, and acknowledging that you're upset. The next thing to do is ask yourself and be really honest with yourself. Okay, so what am I willing to do? What am I willing to do? And what can I actually do? Like maybe you're willing to clinic escort, but you know, if you're my mother who's 70 years old and recovered from a stroke, like that's not something that's going to be super feasible for you. That instead you can do something else, like make phone call, you know, operate the hotline for an abortion fund if they need volunteers to do that, or make donations or solicit donations from your community to an abortion fund. But the really important thing to do, so ask yourself what you're willing to do. But the next thing is like, find someone who knows. Find actual activists and organizations who know how to use your energy, your anger in service of the mission. Instead of just saying like, fuck SCOTUS and like, I want to, give my house or like donate my house to people. That might not be helpful. So go to abortionfunds.org and you can find an abortion fund in your state. Even if your state has banned abortion already, abortion funds are still finding workarounds. Reach out to them. Go to their website, see if they have a volunteer intake form, fill it out, ask them what you can do, what tangible thing you can do. And I want to, it's really obviously very important that we vote, obviously. But be wary in this moment of anyone who's saying that like, what we really need to do is vote. Yes, voting is important, but that midterm election in November does not matter to someone who needs an abortion in Texas right now. What they're thinking about is how am I going to get care today? So make a plan to vote and all of that, but like pour your energy into actually helping people access this care, because that is going to return in dividends, not just power in terms of the movement, but it's going to make you feel like that anger is useful. And that's how we liberate ourselves from this mess.
I wondered if you could talk as we let people come up with a few more questions, because I think they're out there. You spoke earlier about having had to call the police, and you know, in this conversation about voting, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Both this work is on the grassroots level, but the politics of punishment and surveillance are also going to be happening on the local level. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ways that state and local elections may matter more than a midterm for any kind of immediate alleviation of these issues in a given state.
Completely. So Tennessee, for instance, has a trigger law, not in effect yet, but abortion is about to be banned in the state. I think it's banned at 6 weeks right now. And there was a state legislator who lives in Nashville who I had a conversation with recently, asking what they could do. And at the state level, there might not be a lot they can do right now because that state is dominated by Republicans. But at the local level, if the Nashville DA is willing to say and put his money, their money where their mouth is, and say, I will not assist in any prosecution of a person who travels to the state, travels out of the state, helps someone travel for an abortion, I will not be a party to it. That is power and change. Most people, even in conservative states, live in those big liberal cities. If the Houston DA, if the Austin DA are willing to say that and to forego actually participating in the criminalization and prosecution process, because they get to decide what cases they bring. They get to decide which cases they prosecute. If they say, I'm not going to participate in that, suddenly that flow, that of criminalization and power is diminished a little bit. There's a lot that President Biden can do. There's actually a really great New York Times article about what the federal government could do in terms of assisting abortion care. But even just saying like, we're not going to, the Justice Department will in no way assist any sort of attempt at criminalization or prosecution of someone traveling, of someone self-managing an abortion, of someone purchasing pills, any of that. The more that people in positions of power and privilege say, I'm actually not going to do that, that is unacceptable, that is undemocratic, and it's against the Constitution, then the power is sort of sapped from those who think that this is like basically swinging their power around in terms of we're going to make everyone afraid. It's fear. It's a fear-based threat. And if you are willing to say, if you have the privilege to be able to say, I'm not going to give into that fear, then that dismantles that fear. And that helps somebody else. I Shout Your Abortion, my friend Amelia Bono, who started the organization Shout Your Abortion, has this amazing t-shirt that says, I will aid and abet abortion. I will. Like, just even saying that, because it's not a crime. And when you refuse to give power to those who are trying to criminalize it, I really think there's a huge shift in power that can happen there.
And an approach with a long history in this country, the idea that I think that is what has been, for those of us who are rooted in the 19th century, I think that the strategy and tactics of the moment feel very reminiscent of things that were experienced in the 19th century in a very different context. But the ability to sort of recognize the levers of power that people can operate in their own lives.
Absolutely. And I will also say this, for most of American history, the Supreme Court has been a true dumpster fire. There was a brief window of time where it seemed like it was basically from Brown versus Board of Education until maybe about 10 years ago, when it seemed like it was advancing along with the American electorate in terms of diversity and progress. But it's upheld some egregious rulings in the past. Buck v. Bell in 1927, which legalized sterilization of feeble-minded folks. That's still good case law. And Plessy versus Ferguson. I mean, like, the list goes on.
Korematsu.
So, right, like, who, and the question you have to ask yourself is like, who has the power? Instead of just sitting back and waiting for the Supreme Court to undo this mess that they're not going to undo, folks. It's going to get worse. So ask yourself, what power do I have? That's really like at the core of the message of my book. I really hope that can inspire people to say, like, the Supreme Court doesn't get to decide what happens to safe abortion. We do.
And kind of to wrap up, maybe as a final thought, what have you seen, or have you seen anything since the fall of Roe that has given you hope for the future?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the number of people who blew up my phone that day. But Tammy Kromanacher runs the only abortion clinic in Fargo, North Dakota. It's the only abortion clinic in North Dakota, the only one left. It's been the only one for more than 20 years. North Dakota has a trigger law, and abortion will be illegal there on July 28th. She's moving her clinic across the river to Minnesota to continue to provide care at great personal expense. And someone started a GoFundMe for her, and they've raised almost $1 million. Like, that's not nothing. I really believe most people in this country do not support what just happened. They just don't know what to do. And they feel like, especially mainstream liberals for a long time, have just sort of relied on get the vote out and the Supreme Court as sort of the stopgap. Put that power with yourself, because people want to step up. Like $1 million in a week? That's bananas. And that's amazing. And the amount of money that's poured into abortion funds, you know, some of the funds I've talked to have said it's like unprecedented amount. What they need now is for you to keep giving that money, not just a one-time donation. But I think I really believe in the power of the personal and the connective human dignity that's at the heart of abortion. And that ultimately is how we're going to win this fight.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and thanks to Mallory for sharing duties with me this evening. I'm going to drop into the chat once more the links for getting a book shipped to you or for coming to pick it up. We can highly I wish I had one to hold up. I don't. And I just want to say, especially because I see so many familiar faces, thanks so much to those of you who join us for these author talks every week. We really enjoy seeing a lot of our regulars here. All of our virtual programs are posted. You can get to them through our website when it's not broken, or you can also just go to our various YouTube channels. So this will end up pretty quickly on the programming channel. Many of our other programs are on the education channel, but you'll be able to watch this if you came in late or you want to view it again, you want to share it with someone, you want to use it to teach. It will always be available publicly for no cost. And please also, when it's available, check out our events page for other upcoming conversations, both in person and virtual. And know now that many of our in-person talks are also available simulcast. We now have the technology to cast directly from our auditorium. So even more stuff for you to enjoy if you can't make it to the museum. So thanks again to Mallory and Lauren for being here. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.